What's up, friends? Welcome to this special edition of the PD podcast. Today, I am doing a both and. I'm running this conversation for the podcast, but I'm also facilitating an Instagram live video, mainly because I want to hear again tonight from some folks with a very particular question, as we're all 5 weeks into our remote church everywhere, streaming from home, church online rhythm. What I'm curious to discover tonight is what is the general public's opinion about how and where their churches stream from. This is a conversation that's happening everywhere when it comes to the methodology of how we are creating our services. Some people choosing to go exclusively from their home and kind of edit together an at-home experience of both worship, announcements, and the sermon. Some churches going like nothing has kind of changed and running everything straight from their church's main stage where all their camera and production equipment exists. And so the question I'm asking tonight, as we've got several people on, Ted Vaughn on as usual, and a few other church leaders that I'm hoping to bounce into this conversation is, what is your preference, or what are you seeing as the pros and cons when it comes to where we are seeing our church weekend services programmed from, right? Whether they're being filmed from a pastor's living room because that's all they've got. Maybe they were in a setup teardown. Maybe they're in a school environment and they're no longer able to access the school. And now they've pivoted to their home. I was just watching a Good Friends live video. It was pre-recorded, but they ran it for their Sunday service. And he was on the rooftop of their building with the city of Los Angeles as the backdrop. It was super pleasing to the eye, at least in my opinion. There have been other people who have not shifted a thing. They've ran just as if they were preaching off of their normal church platform. They're utilizing all the existing tech in place. And this is my question for the night, and this is going to be the topic of conversation for this episode is, what's your thought when consuming this as both an engager, somebody who is watching, somebody who's a part of the church, somebody who's in a very different norm? You're not able to come to church. And so when you see your pastors streaming or recording or preaching from wherever they're streaming from, do you feel alienated? Do you feel some sense of comfort because you're seeing a place that you're familiar with? Is it a both and? Have you never even thought about it? Is it something that we need to be diving deeper into when it comes to the ethos of how we're recording and making our content? Or is it just whatever it needs to be because the message is the most important thing? This is my question for tonight. And if you're on with me on Instagram Live, I've got my phone tethered to a roll of gaff tape, and it's aimed at my laptop because I'm recording both of these conversations together. So without further ado, here's what I want to do. I want to ask the question, is this live? That's right, Daniel, it is live. Watch my hand go from the screen, which is in front of the camera, in front of my cell phone. I just happen to have one pointing at the other so that I can kind of manage both together. So if you're joining us right now, this is going to become an episode for the PD podcast. But the question that I'm asking tonight, and I know there are several production managers on the line. There are several people who are having to kind of make and navigate the decision of where and how we are going to produce weekend content. Certainly, we've tried a few different things. I like certain things more than I like other things. So this is the question I'm putting out there tonight. What does the weekend service look like to you with the church that either you're helping produce or the church that you're watching? And what is your preference? Do you have a preference? Do you like seeing the worship environment that you're used to? Or have you started to kind of expect to see more of your church leadership, the church personalities that you're used to seeing in real life? Have you started to see the expectation or the shift that they're going into more of a domestic environment, right? Shooting from their home or maybe shooting from their neighborhood, their backyard, their kitchen, their living room, their driveway. I'm curious to know what you're seeing, and I'm curious to know what your mind and what your perception is as you're seeing these things come out. So, high tech, Kevin McPeak, thank you very much. If you saw it in person, you'd laugh because it's just a DSLR running through my laptop and my cell phone pointing at the screen as I record both of these. So, Kevin, let me ask you the question since you're on the text thread. You've been managing the Look alongside of a few other folks for 9 churches, including ours. And for some situations, you have streamed from the large stage, the platform. And then in other situations, you've made major pivots because some of the churches inside of our network were utilizing like a rental in a setup teardown situation. What's been your guts as you have been kind of navigating as the producer in all of these situations for each of the churches? And what's your preference as you've now been on both sides of the coin? You've been producing services and you have also been exploring other churches and what they've been doing. Any thoughts in your own perspective? And while I've got the Facebook Live, or I'm sorry, the Instagram Live going, I'm sure I can get an interview on here if somebody's willing to give their 2 cents. All you need to do is type in the comment section, I've got an idea, or I'd love to give some feedback. I'll tether you in. You won't be on video, so you don't have to worry about that. I'll just be capturing your audio, but I'd love to get some other opinions in this also. I've got some opinions rolling through. The first one is, I supplement my learning from several different pastors online, and they use different platforms to shoot from. One is a studio, the other is an office, and I can imagine it doesn't bother people as much as, I'm guessing as much as we're asking. I appreciate the in-house approach, says Daniel Scotty. Feels like we're all together in it. Hey, Daniel, can I click you in? Would you mind elaborating on that? I think that you've got some stock in the game since you helped produce Saddleback's service. This is the Saddleback Purpose-Driven Podcast. Can I click you in? I'm not even going to wait for your answer. I'm just going to invite you to the conversation. Here it comes. Get ready. Coming in hot. Daniel Scotty.
This might be my first live ever.
Hey, I appreciate your courage to step into the conversation. So as I adjust my microphone, you guys are producing, you shifted, right? You're doing some worship stuff. At first it was from your guys' Lake Forest main platform. Then Rick made a shift, right, to his garage?
Yeah. Well, we actually tried to film. So most of the stuff that was in the worship center that we pre-taped, we saw things starting to shift pretty quickly. So John, our worship pastor, decided to say, "Hey, let's film like about 3 weekends worth before we go into a potential mandate." And most of our worship up until Easter was all pre-recorded before California mandate happened. And then for Easter, kind of pushed us into how do we, as things continue to escalate, how do we kind of abide by those things and I guess showcase that even through our expression of worship and push our creativity. And yeah, the team, if you haven't seen Saddleback's Easter worship, you should go check it out. I feel like it's a mass collaboration of multiple video editors, multiple audio engineers remixing stuff, people dropping equipment off at other people's homes and doing our best to kind of embrace the like, hey, if you're at home, we're at home, and that's okay. And I feel like more than ever, people have been able to, I guess, lower the bar in sense of the high production and kind of give grace to, I mean, you're seeing it on The Tonight Show and all these other networks are lowering their bar. They've had to based off of their studios and stuff. So for us to try and do that, so yeah.
That's really good. Now, has that presented, what do you think have been the largest challenges? Because for us, personnel wise, it gets really difficult trying to get, everything ported over to somebody's home. Uh, I realize I've had to shoot a lot of stuff on my own. Right now, I'm shooting this 100% solo, nobody helping me out. And so it does take a little bit of a technical, a baseline. How have you guys been navigating
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I feel like it's varied. Sometimes it's just like an iPhone is good enough, and do a take with your iPhone, and then do audio recording separately. Um, only a few people. We've kind of like done a self inventory of like what equipment sets do different worship leaders have, who has different like microphone interfaces and stuff like that. So it's kind of been a mixed bag of all of that.
What's been your preference personally as you've now been on both sides of the coin? You started right pre-recording at the Lake Forest location. I saw your guys' recent mashup that had everybody everywhere in a really creative edit across all these multiple mobile devices. It looked super sharp, sounded incredible. For seeing the next 6 weeks, what permissions are you giving yourself as a team? And what are the things you guys are trying to aspire to as you continue to do what everybody else is trying to figure it out?
Yeah, man, that's we're all still trying to figure out what's that look like. There's again, it's been a huge collaboration of just different creatives within our team and trying to figure out the best next steps going forward of how do we continue to deliver a great worship experience, but still, I don't know, find ourselves in these mandates and regulations and stuff like that. So we're still sorting it out. I think because of some of the stuff we learned from Easter, it will be based off of like what equipment people have and um, trying to do our best to reshoot. And I know there's a lot of Zoom calls and video calls and phone calls, like testing throughout the week. So my role isn't super involved in all of the like planning and filming and editing and stuff like that. So for me, when we were watching our Easter service, it was actually the first time I was able to view it, which was really moving for me to be able to see the way the team was able to create it in that way.
That's awesome. Tell me how impressed you are with my current setup right now.
It's pretty well. I'd love to see the behind the scenes of it. I feel like that's really where we'll be able to see how.
Hey, let me give you a solid zoom out
Yeah.
so that you can see it. You ready? I'm moving. Are you seeing that? That is the behind the scenes action right there for everybody to see. Hey, Daniel, I really appreciate your perspective. Personal preference. I don't know if you're at liberty to, but when you sit down and you consume something, right? When it's not on your watch or it's something that your team is putting together, what do you resonate the most with when you're watching a weekend service?
That's hard. I mean, I feel like I miss corporate worship. So there are times where I love being able to see people together. But I also appreciate the in-home, like they're there, I'm here kind of thing. Like I get it. We could connect that we're both in the same situation. Um, so I don't know. I kind of go back and forth between it. Personally, I feel like in this season, I've really appreciated just the like authenticity of people being in their homes, on their couch, doing the best they can with what they have. If it's just a guitar and their iPhone video and people going live, I feel like connection right now is trumping quality. So if we're able to stay connected and people are feeling like, hey, like I'm not able to go out and worship with my church family like we used to, but being able to see, familiar faces from your church kind of in their home, it kind of brings you into their life a little bit as well. So there's some personal connection. You get to see people's couch preference and preferences and stuff like that, which you typically don't see on the platform. So there's some, I guess, personality in it naturally when you're in those environments.
Yeah, that's really great. I super appreciate your perspective, Daniel. Thanks for always delivering, I think, a great perspective, balancing what is, arguably, some of the best production stuff coming out of the West Coast, what you guys put together. And then really that authenticity part of not leaving people high and dry when it comes to saying, we're with you in the scenario also. I think you guys did a great job of balancing that this last Easter. Thanks for your opinion. I appreciate it.
Cool. Good to see you, bro.
Yeah, I'll talk to you soon. That's a great perspective. Daniel Scotty is one of the production leads at Saddleback and does a great job of helping kind of marry both the worship content and what we see inside of their largest building, their Lake Forest Auditorium. So great perspective from Daniel. I would love to pop in an old faithful friend. I bet you if he's not cooking or eating, he'll jump in with me. And I bet you've got something worth adding to the conversation as I wait for him to dive in. If you've got something, yes, haha, back at it again, my friend.
What's up, buddy?
Hey, this time I'm trying to find myself out of the throngs of my garage and in a little bit better lighting with a little bit better setup. You've been doing a ton of really great work tweeting some of your perspectives as we're 5 weeks into seeing churches navigate this new normal. What's your take when it comes to from the platform versus from the living room? Is there too much thought going into the process? What's your take on it?
I think in the beginning there was a huge assumption that we had to be in the sanctuary, and I think to the earlier gentleman's point, there's been something refreshing about going home. I think post-Easter, to see people in their homes in a more relaxed environment has been helpful. I do wonder about the psychological connection people have to their sanctuary and the inability to be there and the value in seeing that. I think few people would articulate it and say, I really value my pastor in the sanctuary, but I think there is something that feels right, familiar, consistent about that. And I wonder if this plays out for another, 2 months or longer, potentially, if that won't elevate in importance versus the at-home. I think we're going to see more Facebook Live. I think we're going to see more Zoom, more at-home connection opportunities. So I wonder, and again, this is a question and less a preference, I wonder if there won't be an increased desire or value on the message or some portion of that weekend service coming from the sanctuary.
Yeah, I know for some it's just a matter of how little option you have to move what gear you do own, right? So many houses utilize like a Clark or an installation organization where they hardwire everything in, so you can't just pull out a $5,000 camera to take to your living room. So the both and has, I think, presented itself, at least from the angles that I've seen it. Some places can't move, and so they've got to utilize what they've got where they're at. And then the desire is to supplement other parts of the program in places that do kind of tell the story of we're in this with you also.
That's exactly what two of the churches I work with regularly are doing this Sunday. They're keeping the message anchored at the sanctuary, but they're doing worship in a home environment, and they're doing announcements in a different home environment, and then they're doing a family interview in another home. So they're going to have lots of different homes. There's going to be a lot of authenticity and creativity, and frankly, it's harder in edit to get all of that balanced and done well, I think, versus just having everybody in the sanctuary. But I also think there's the optics, right, of don't want to have, like, I think churches that have 12 people on the worship stage bouncing around, even if they're 6 feet apart, I think that's beginning to be problematic from an optics standpoint.
Yeah, I think that subliminally it's saying that, we're throwing off the concern of helping see this thing solved sooner than later. Stephen Cooper, Stephen Cooper, he commented and he said, I've felt like worship in the normal space is important. It keeps a connection between people. I do think that there are these visual cues. You and I have talked about them before, about maybe instead of just recording from a normal place that you always lead from, maybe readdressing your room, maybe going to the back of your auditorium and kind of showing that long shot of what people usually walk in and seeing, or maybe going to the backstage or even going to your lobby and shooting from your lobby to utilize that familiarity, but just switch it up.
I mean, I would love to see one Sunday a pastor literally go on the journey from there. Like the door closes, they walk in, you hear the feet on the ground. They're, you know what I mean? And like that journey of them coming in the facility. I mean, I think this is an opportunity to innovate and take creativity to all new levels. But I do think, at least the feedback I'm hearing, like Stevens, more people are resonating and appreciating that sense of tether or continuity with their sanctuary. I think there's an emotional, psychological thing happening there that may grow. My theory is it will grow more important or more valuable the longer we're in this stay at home.
Yeah, that's really good. Ted, you have your own podcast that you have been recording to. If people want to catch your content in a more direct way, how do they do that?
Hey man, my internet crapped out. Could you ask that question again?
Oh, I was just saying, I was teeing you up. I was saying that you recently launched your own podcast. So if people want to catch you and more of your perspective, especially since you help so many churches out, how can they find you?
Yeah, thanks. This is all new territory for me, so it feels really weird even talking about it. But I have a website, tedvaughn.com. It's in the process of being built. Chris Lupe, Scott Deal, I'm on you.
Yeah, there's some good ones.
Recording content and gonna have it go live in I think another 3 weeks. So for now, all the at Ted Vaughn at all the social channels will work.
That's awesome. I love it. Hey, if you don't follow Ted on Twitter, he's got some really great 160 character thoughts that come blasting out in the most random times of the day. Ted, thanks for your perspective. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, buddy. See ya.
Super good insight. It's interesting. Daniel Scotty, who was on the conversation earlier, he just wrote, we've definitely struggled with that and not wanting to convene people together to film as much as possible. I think a lot of us are in that situation of kind of weighing the pros and cons of pulling people together. First of all, if you run a largely volunteer team, one, you can't force them to come together if they don't feel comfortable to, right? You can't mandate somebody, and you certainly shouldn't be threatening them to come together in order to accomplish whatever you want to record. If you're on staff, that's a different situation. We've been coming together. We reduced what is normally like a 5 or 6 person band, a 4-person tech crew, down to just 3 individuals who are playing the worship set for the last several weeks. I'm doing the camera work, and then I have one other person who's essentially editing in place real time. So that's reduced what's typically been about 10 down to 5. And if you look at any of our worship stuff, we're very spread out. I mean, overtly spread out so that people, when they see us on video, I hope that it adds to the that security of going, they're taking as many precautions as possible outside of doing a lot of extra post-production. If you've never tried to record every person from their own home and then stitch it all together in a way that sounds worth replaying, it is a ton of work. So before you just lean in and say, well, how come people have never done that before? That is one of the reasons why it's so not done so often, is because it's a difficult process to record everybody well from their own location and then have enough time to edit it all together, mix all the audio, push it all into a final video, and then get it out to play. I'm certain that if you go look at the Saddleback video, that was likely, I would argue, like probably 100 hours worth of preparation that went into that final product that played for 4 minutes. An incredible 4 minutes, but it was a massive production. Just knowing what you have to do to produce something as basic as this and have it work well, that was quite a feat to put out. I love the quality of worship. Thanks, Ted. I appreciate it. We nail it. We do work diligently to provide something that makes people feel like we're playing our part, both in the social distancing mandate, but also in not negating the power of coming together for worship. And I'm not talking about the people coming together, but just instrumentally, when you've got all of those things working together, you know that there is there's an energy, right? There's something cohesive that happens when the band comes together, even if they're spread apart a ton, that they build on one another. And I certainly feel like those have been some of our best online worship experiences when they're actually bumpering off of the sermon. I think that everybody is kind of in that space together. We understand the brevity and the depth and the magnitude of the situation we're in as a culture. And then their gifting comes to play together, even if it's streaming. I think that you notice when all of that comes together and everybody's aware of the moment. And I think that that's been some of the luxuries we have found ourselves in over the last several weeks. That's just me speaking from my own vantage point. I'm gonna tag in somebody else as we get in and through this. Let me look at. Well, let's tag in Chad. Chad, I don't know if you're able to talk right now, but I'm gonna give you a holler. We haven't had you on the podcast yet. Chad just became the executive pastor over at his church. And Chad, if you're brave enough to get on the line, you won't end up being on the video for the live stream, but you will end up on my Facebook or my Instagram live video. Ooh, Chad declined. It's okay, Chad, dude. Nobody's judging you. Throw me a thumbs up if you want to try you back. Let me get after just one more individual, and then we'll see if we can't put a cap on this conversation. I'm going to tag in James Gutierrez. James is a creative fellow. We go way back in time. And James he's a chameleon. He can produce on the highest levels and the best, largest stages. He's been both the talent and the producer, but he's also able to do a setup, teardown situation. That's kind of the rhythm that he's been working in as of recently. James, get to a place where I can add you into my live stream so that you and I can have a conversation. I know you can. Yes.
Mingo.
Yo, good to see you, James Gutierrez.
You too, man.
Hey,
I'm really, there's a really low light right up there.
Yeah, no, I get it, dude. It looks like an interrogation corner, but it's perfect.
Tell me the truth.
So you've been listening to the conversation. I'm not breaking the edit for the podcast. What is your opinion, both as a partaker in ministry, somebody who's a part of a local church, but also as you've been helping people navigate what the look has been? Why don't you tell us who you're helping create content for, and then give us your perspective?
Sure. Bring it to the top, man. Ask me exactly what.
Okay, so first of all, we're all trying to figure out, is it better to go from our main stages as we are producing content that goes live to the internet, or is there an advantage to kind of taking it off the stage? Some have been going into their living rooms. You have been helping produce for a church. So what's that church? And then two, what's been your theory as you've been kind of creating that space for that online church?
Right. I mean, given the context, obviously it is difficult. We're not allowed to gather, and officially we can't even gather in small numbers, and so even being able to produce even small scale things is difficult. But I have been incredibly encouraged, even in this past Sunday for Easter, seeing how so many different churches have figured out creative ways to be able to actually minister to their own church families and be able to worship God through digital means. And for our church, I'm part of Restored Church in San Diego. We actually, for Good Friday, we were able to compile pre-recorded videos that different church members were able to read scripture, and also our different worship teams were able to come together and collaborate and create tracks to be able to play. And we're able to put together a whole hour's worth of content across our five family of church affiliations.
Network, yeah.
So we have five autonomous churches that not only span um, on the West Coast, but we also have a church in South Africa that's part of our family of churches, and so we're all able to share that together. And it was really encouraging. It was encouraging to be able to see it. Some of us are fortunate enough, like my wife and I, we both are part of the worship team. So she leads in vocals, and I'm able to back her up. And we actually have a roommate and he's an amazing guitarist. So we're able to do a set, even just us three, and being able to do that. And then before things got really crazy with restrictions, we had preemptively decided to record some things in our church space. Within reason, on a closed set of a few people, and we were able to get a collective of about 10 to 12 different songs, to just have a roster to be able to then give to our pastors and elders to say, hey, on this Sunday, based on the preach, you have at least these to be able to choose from. And that's been really good for us to not have to worry about compromising the restrictions and exposing ourselves, but then still be able to have our church family ministering to each other. Because it's not that I'm knocking in any way, shape, or form. We can pull up any video online on YouTube, and we can worship our God through that. Absolutely. But there is something that I think is so sweet in being able to have the people that we don't get to interact regularly with right now. Being able to use our gifting to be able to serve each other, and what it feels, as odd as it may sound, given that it's on screens, it feels so much more intimate.
Yeah, that's good.
That there's just such value in that. And so, I mean, we're here with H4N. We just have our Zoom recorders. We have, if we have to, we're on iPhones. We're making it happen, man. And it's absolutely worth it. And it's actually bringing out what I at least suspect. My wife Faye, she is definitely the introvert of us two. I'm more the extrovert, and she's actually for the first time hey, we should record some more songs. And I'm like, if you're for it, I'm all for it. Let's do it. It's absolutely it's an interesting experience. And I will say this: these things that we've documented in this time don't just last for today. And I think that's a huge thing. That the reality is now stuff that we've recorded, really, my daughter's a 4-year-old. When she's my dream of her being a singer-songwriter when she's a teenager, she'll be able to watch these videos and be like, what happened during this time, and I could tell this was such a fruitful time for us to be pushed into a space of vulnerability, inviting people into our actual homes and be able to show that that we can still have courage to minister our God and share of who we are, using the technology and the means that we can, and we don't count it as a restriction, we count it as an opportunity, and a blessing.
Such a great word.
Good, man.
When you talked about how it's like a timestamp, right? You think of it being a mile marker for our generation. The one time globally the whole church needed to pivot and figure out how to run Easter from not their normal spaces. That is pretty tremendous. And you're totally right that it's more than just for the service for that weekend. These are now catalogs of our attempts at worshiping and bringing the local church together that I think is really powerful.
It really is, man. And especially when you're asking churches that have never needed to do that, coming into that, we've never had to pre-record a worship set or even just lay it down on video. We've let alone being able to even record audio on it. We record the Sundays, but it's so new. But seeing people step forward and have their anxieties and because it's a new space, but still being able to step out and encourage, I think that's huge. It's huge to see people step out in boldness, and it's a good thing, man.
What's your one piece of advice for a church your size, right? What's your guys' average weekend size, just so the listener gets a idea? And then what's one piece of advice from the guy who's helping produce all this content from somebody else who's wrestling through it?
Sure. I mean, our church is restored South Bay. We're in the South Bay, and we average about 150 on a Sunday. Our churches vary between 150 to 200 on a Sunday. We are a church planting church, so usually once we start to get up in numbers, we already have an intention of sending someone else out to plant. So we kind of carry that number span. I will say it's not as much of an advantage of resource to be able to have a plethora of talented individuals, but it's a huge chance for people of the few to really step out in faith and be able to collaborate. And surprisingly enough, like even given our context now, I would say in our church we have a good sized worship team, and we're close like family, and we help and step out for each other more than just to be able to serve on Sundays. But through this process, we're also learning of other individuals that are willing to step up because they're inspired by it. So I would say, don't feel like you don't have the resource that's there. It's worth the ask. And this context has given people, I think, an encouragement and a courage to be able to say, hey, I can actually serve tangibly. And if it means I'm not standing physically on a stage and maybe being in front of a screen is more, or a camera gives me a little bit more of that then let's do that. Let's come together and go for it. I think for this type of a time, we need it more than ever.
Yeah,
so
like
don't
advice.
hold back in the least, I think that's a huge thing. As far as practically, creatively, I say let the creative juices flow. I mean, I've been doing things these days at home. I'm stay at home with my daughter and working full time remote, and I'm doing creative things because I just have time on my hands, man. And so do it, try it, like make it something that I think will whether it makes a difference or not, if it fills you up and you worship Jesus through it, then go for it, and it makes you more the person for everything else that you can serve God through.
I love it.
Don't hold back, go for it, man.
I love it. James, thanks for that perspective. I'll talk to you soon.
Mango, I love you, bro.
Love you too, man.
All right, man.
Another great perspective from a church that's running in that 150 to 200 range. I love just his own perspective was how they discovered the abilities of other people who don't usually step into that space, and how valuable is that, especially as a church leader, when you go, yes, you can definitely help us accomplish this goal, especially somebody who's not usually active in that role. What a great way to leverage maybe some unforeseen talent and some unforeseen partnerships inside of your ministry, as those who typically don't step forward into what would be like the light or the production or onto the stage, all of a sudden that playing field is leveled, and several people can help make something happen. I mean, for us, even in our space, as simple as helping people coming in and help just set the set, learning how to light, like a key light is 45 degrees to this direction, and a fill light is 50% what the key light is supposed to be in the opposite 45 degree. Make sure you've got a backlight, which I don't have right now, but usually it's the sun. Those things get taught, right? You can teach them and you can sit everybody down in a class, but how much better is it when they're caught, right? When somebody catches it by just being with you. And while we know that like the restrictions make it very difficult, this is a great season to bring some apprentices alongside and just allow them to see how it is that you're doing what you're doing, so that as we do see those restrictions lifted, you now have a fully equipped and fully savvy next grouping of people that can help you accomplish what it is that you're trying to do. So, friends, I love you. This recording will be turned into a back-to-back set of episodes. If you join me on the Instagram Live, I can't say thank you enough for sharing your own vantage point. If I didn't get to you on this round, I'll catch you on the next conversation. Absolutely love seeing the church innovate in this season. We are with you. We're working out our own solutions, so you're not alone. I certainly am not the expert, but I will, and I always love facilitating the conversations from those who are doing it with all their heart. I love you guys, and I'll talk to you soon.